talking all things theatre and events.
I would love for large, well-known venues to programme more up-close sensory work.
Kind of had to think really quickly about what our ethos was going to be and what our aims and goals of it was to be.
We created all of the creative captions. We put them all into the programme.
The Stage Is Yours podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the Stage Is Yours podcast. I'm your host Cal Graham, joined as always by producer Dan, and we're talking all things theatre and events. Today we're joined by Clare Louise-English and Joe Sargeant of Hot Coals Productions. We talk everything Hot Coals, from their shows to how they've adapted during the pandemic to keep producing work. We also talk all their work around accessible theatre and all the creative solutions that they come up with to create it. Clare Louise-English and Joe Sargeant, the stage is yours. So join us on the podcast today. We're talking to Hot Coal Productions. We're joined by Joe Sargeant and Clare Louise-English. How are you two?
Good, thank you.
Grand.
Yeah, very well, all things considered.
Yes, very much so. It's certainly an odd time when we're recording this, and lots of things are chopping and changing in the run up to Christmas. So let's talk about Hot Coals. Let's just simply start with, what is Hot Coal Productions?
Wow. Well, Hot Coal Productions, we are a company that creates both theatre, which is where we started, and now film. We started in 2012 when Claire and I were studying on RADA's MA Theatre Lab together, and when we finished we started up a company, and we specialise, I suppose you could say, specialise in accessible work, where we try and bring our audiences together and create an inclusive experience for both deaf and hearing audiences. And Claire, you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, and also we started off in theatre, and now we've had a little slight change of name. Now we're Hot Coals Productions, to reflect the fact that we're moving into also making film now, and that's been something very recent because of lockdown, because of the pandemic, because of all the theatres closing. So now we're in a position to make film, which we always kind of thought we would long term. But then the pandemic happened and we had to change a piece that was about to go into a theatre festival, and we made it into a short film. And so the future has kind of arrived. So it's quite an exciting point for us, actually.
Yeah, so obviously I've sent out the kind of question and topic, so we will jump around it because they're all in a similar vein. Obviously the pandemic has had a massive impact on everyone and everything that we do. So that's great to hear that you guys are kind of adapting to that. So how have you kind of found that has made you change and kind of adapt to the new, I want to use the word normal, but I feel a little bit weird saying the new normal.
Yeah, I hate that. I don't like the new normal. I prefer the old normal in many ways. Yeah, I mean, it's been a crazy journey for Joe and I. It's weird because it's been a really difficult year for so many people, and it's been hard for us. But it's also been quite a year of growth for us. Like, we've really grown as a company, expanded what we do, moved into new areas. We've learned so much this year. And I think it will inform all of the work that we do now, actually theatre and film, going forwards, the work that we've done this year, for sure.
So the kind of projects that you had lined up, and I think it's amazing to hear that you've fully almost kind of sped up that timeline of changing your company from theatre to, well, now a complete production house, if you like.
Yeah, because we had a show, it was kind of pipelining, that was going to be in the RADA Festival this summer just gone, called A New Way of Life, which is slightly out of title at the moment, but that had come a long time ago. And then pandemic, and then RADA contacted us and said, well, obviously we're not doing the festival, in person now, and we had this big production and we were going to go rehearse there and put on the show. So they said they wanted to do something online, and at first we were like, yeah, we could maybe like do some interviews or maybe make a documentary or do something about the theatre show that we were going to make. And then it kind of dawned on us that actually we could take a section of that larger story and make it into a short film. So we ended up making a short film, like from conception to delivery during the first lockdown.
Yeah.
Which was quite mad.
It was quite brilliant because it was a co-commission with Home Manchester's the theatre Home in Manchester, and they did something called Homemakers Project, and it was a brilliant little opportunity. And it's been remarkable, really, because I'm down in Surrey and Clare's in London, so we had to figure out firstly how we were going to work in our day-to-day, but then when we were making the short film, how are we going to do that, and how can we divide it up, and how can we make a budget stretch, and it was brilliant. I mean, I was terribly sad I couldn't be there for filming, but I was delighted that I was able to. I did the voiceover for it and design work for it, and we managed to source props and send them to actors at their homes, and it was a remarkable process, and it also made us realise how much we knew through our theatre work, and we just needed to adapt what we do in theatre for the film, and it really gave us something to bring back some positive creative energy as well, because it was such a difficult time for everybody, and us included, and it really gave us something lovely and wonderful to work towards.
Yeah, absolutely. How did you guys find that transition from theatre and kind of live on stage to being behind a camera, and kind of how you can and that transition between the two?
Well, I turned to Clare when we were trying to organise what we were doing it to, and we'd found someone to film it, and we'd found all of the actors who were going to be in the theatre production themselves, so we were able to give them work. But I turned to Clare and I said, "You're going to have to direct it." And she went, "What?" I'm so, "What?" And I was like, "Yes, you've got to direct it, because I can't be there. We can't direct it together, so you're going to have to direct it." And I suppose that would have been the biggest transition, was for Clare to suddenly go from being, a duo theatre maker, because we make everything together, to having to figure out how to do a storyboard or work out, shots. And I suppose you're better to talk about it, Clare, but I remember her sort of, she lent herself, like, it felt like such, from an outside, from my perspective, she jumped in both feet and did such an amazing job. It seemed really natural to her, even though really didn't know what we were doing.
yeah, thanks, Joe, that's nice to hear. Yeah, it was weird because I kept going, because Joe was like, "Well, don't you think you should be there when they shoot it?" I was like, "Yeah, all right, I'll go down and like lend a hand." And then eventually she was like, "You do know you're directing this thing, don't you?" And I was like, well, I don't know how to direct films. I was just gonna stand at the side and hold the coats, So then, as Joe said, it was like, okay, well, so I better take responsibility for this then. I better organise a shot list and a plan for the day, and it was, I suppose because I'm a bit of a bit anal when it comes to like really planning everything. So I suppose of my massive organizational skills just all came into play, and I sort of accidentally did things that a director would do just because I'm a control freak and I like to plan. So yeah, such a massive learning curve, and then doing the editing, like that was just things that we've never done before. But we both, I think, really loved it, and getting to write together again, because we used to write together at RADA, and then since then the work that we've made has all been non-verbal. So we've sort of written together in a sense that we've devised together, but we've not actually sat down and written a script together. So that was the first time that we got to do that after a really long time, and remembered how much we loved it.
Yeah, and it was also prior to lockdown. Luckily, I'd done an R&D while Claire was on tour with Ramps on the Moon, doing Oliver Twist. I'd already done an R&D on this project, and I'd interviewed. So the film, My Darling Christopher, is based on a true story of this called Clive, and he lives fairly close to me. So I'd already interviewed him and filmed the interview material, and we had that to work from, and that was really great. And we were able to re-interview him during lockdown via an iPad to sort of do all those bits. And we brought in a wonderful somebody we work with called Stephen Collins, who is profoundly deaf theatre maker and actor, and he was able to give us a sort of what we call a dramaturgical perspective on the work, and that's when we started to experiment and working with. What was great was we were working with an editor who works in theatre but also has experience of creating accessible theatre. So when we were doing the captions, for example, we were able to be more creative and theatrical with the captions and subtitles, which is different from how other people do it. It was more less distracting in the fact that the eye is drawn to the actions, because normally you've got the captions at the bottom. We integrated them into the actual film so that the eye isn't, you're not darting your eyes to the bottom then back into the action. It's all there, it's all beautiful, and it's all designed to be within the aesthetic of the film, and that was a lovely discovery in itself, and something that we were like, how do we do this? Oh, okay. And we figured it out. So it was great to bring that knowledge.
We do everything having no idea what the fuck we're doing, and we work it out as we go along. So this is so different in many ways.
It's absolutely the best way to be, though. The best way to just figure out by doing. It's always the best way to go. You mentioned they're working with your throughout this kind of process. Has it kind of, and you've mentioned it already, that it's kind of sped up your process of changing your kind of how you work and the things you produce. Do you feel that you're kind of, I've spoken to a number of other companies who have said that doing things digitally, that had so much more reach than initially kind of thought, and they're reaching areas of markets that they never thought they'd reach. I spoke to Polka Theatre last week, and they said they've got people from Italy tuning into their kind of things that they would never normally have reached at all, but suddenly this new market that they're reaching. So they've said that this is now going to be how they do. They have a digital offering for most things that they're looking to do in the future. So I wondered if that was something that you guys are looking to take out of the pandemic and make.
Absolutely. We sent the film, for example, keep going back to the film, there's other things we've done as well, but the film, we've sent it off to film festivals. And just last week we got there was a festival in Canada which sends the film. So it's a festival that's divided into different countries, but the one that we were in was in Canada. And that Canadian festival sends your film to judges, well, not judges, but selected audiences in in LA. So the Canadian festival sends the film to an audience in LA, and then the audience in LA then record their feedback for your film, and then they send you that feedback. And that was amazing, because we had people in LA watching our film and telling us what we were doing right, what we were doing well, what we were doing right, what we were doing right, and what we were it was, no, I'm teasing. But it was really interesting to hear their perspective on the film and what they got from the film. And I think now branching out into these festivals, and our film has been it's been all over the place, hasn't it now? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, it's been all I can't remember. Yeah, it's been all over the world, which is just, we had toyed for a little while with the idea of touring theatre across the world, and that was very much our plan, actually, for this year, which of course didn't happen. So it's great to think that we can still get, do that with the films. It's been a real shame that we haven't actually been able to go on that film festival, physically go and meet the people and do all that networking. And I hope that we get to do that next time. But it's just opened up a whole new audience for us and a whole new recognition, which has been amazing. Like the film's won awards, and after 8 years in theatre, we haven't won an award. We make our first film, we've got like 3, so it's nice.
No, I think it's
and
really...
it's kind of nice. Sorry.
That's right. I think it is really interesting how that, despite everything that's gone on and throughout the last, 9 months that it is now, is all these positives that are coming out of it, and everyone managing to find something to be able to do to still be creative and positive, but then also find out that actually looking forward, hopefully as we come out of this, that there's new and exciting things that kind of broaden and expand what you offer.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I mean,
and
one
also,
of the
it's changed. Sorry, darling. I was going to say, yeah, one of the other projects that we were doing during recognition, another type of recognition we got was that we applied for the emergency funding from Arts Council, and we were lucky enough to get that, and that allowed us to be able to continue work, which was absolutely vital for us as a company. But one of the projects that we were able to undergo during that time was the development of the captions for for our next theatre production, which has been in the pipeline for about a year and a half or so prior to this, because it's a big show, yeah. And we were able to remotely, we prior to the lockdown, we'd done an R&D, research development phase, entirely focused on access of this scripted show, and the whole purpose of that was to look at access and how we would approach access for this particular show. And then in lockdown, we created all of the created captions. We put them all into the program. We looked at how we can be inventive and artistic with them, and what different things we can do them. So now, when we go into the rehearsal studio to make that show, we've got the captions before we make the show. They are in, and that's something and for us, I mean, that's highlighted how we want to work in the future, because normally access is something that's bolted on at the end. It's not something that's considered throughout the process. I mean, it is for us. We've always considered it throughout the process, from the very beginning. Yeah. Now,
but even with, I mean, yeah, because this is our first show. The show's called Earshot, and it's the first show that we've wanted to do that already has written text. It's spoken word, whereas up until now, all our shows have been physical theatre. So it's enabled us. So we sort of realised, even though access is so important to us and it's so part of integrated into the process, when we did the R&D and we did a sharing at the end, we did still find ourselves in that same situation where you're making the captions last, and we were like, oh, this is not the way to do this. It's because it's such a laborious process. It takes so long. You can understand why, if you leave it to the end, you've run out of time and money. And that's sort of what we really sort of experienced firsthand when we did the R&D. So then this time, to be able to put all our focus onto just doing the captions and just getting them bob on before we've even started rehearsals means that they can be tweaked as we go through the rehearsal process. We're not going to run out of time to finish them. And I mean, we've concluded that we will always do it that way round in future.
It also means that things like punchlines aren't missed, because the techie who is going to be operating the captions has been working with them alongside the show from the beginning and has that comedic timing and understands when those punchlines are going to come. Yeah. Nothing's given away. If you put it on at the end, they've not had time to get that into their bones.
Nothing in the world worse than watching a show and seeing the actor deliver the line when the punchline of the joke is already on the caption. It just drives me insane.
Because you guys have done some work, a mutual contact for that is with Tim Kelly.
Yeah.
Yes. So Tim's, I've worked with Tim for a few years on various other projects before Tim does what Tim does now, which obviously is all around captioning and his captionator and all of this sort of stuff. And he's coming on the podcast in early January to chat for, I think, people who aren't necessarily able to do that, I'd like to chat a little bit more about accessibility and kind of from someone who works in theatre and stuff like that. I think our industry, there's an awful lot of things that we can do an awful lot better, and not just do it in the kind of really straightforward way of a screen with some captions on to do that. Because I think a lot of theatres now offer a captioned performance of some description, but on a fairly simple level. Whereas I love the idea of you guys integrating it within the show a little bit more, so it's not as obvious.
Yeah, for sure.
It's an art. It's I always say, because I do a lot of the design work for Hot Coals as well, I always consider access to be to be the canvas that we paint the show on, if you know what I mean. So we start with the access from the very beginning. It's so integrated into our shows. And I suppose if you think of our early work, we started off doing physical theatre, and our stories were very much visual storytelling. And the way which we used access with them was we integrated things like lights and visual cues to help tell the story and direct the audience's eye to where they need to be looking. And the wonderful irony was that we were making work that we wanted to be accessible to both deaf and hearing audience, and we wanted the story to be received from the same performance space in a shared experience between the deaf and hearing audience. But then what ended up happening was, because there was no words, we used loads and loads of sound effects. So then we were like, oh shit, we need to find a way of visually representing all the sound effects as well. So that's when we started developing things like in our second show, Finders Keepers, there's a baby in that cries. And when the baby cries, the set is in a kind of junkyard. And there was a big set of festoon lights that hung around the junkyard setting. And every time the baby cried, the festoon lights would flicker sort of in the same kind of tempo. So there was that constant representation of the baby and his journey, and we're all there in that same space, because there is an argument that having the interpreter on the side of the stage or the captions somewhere else, that you're splitting the focus all the time. We really wanted everything to be brought together. And we're sort of continuing that now with our caption stuff. And we also had to add in things for that exact cue that we're talking about. The way we were able to really make that clear is with the performer on stage. So when the baby starts crying, looking at the baby, putting your hands over your ears as if to say it's noisy, and then looking at the lights, so that you're saying baby's there, it's crying, it's making a noise, and that is what's representing the noise. So for anyone who didn't catch that, that's making it even clearer. So it's little things that you can just add in, and a lot of them to us feel like common sense now, but I mean are just a case of thinking, storytelling, how am I telling this story, and how can I tell this story better and clearer. And
I think all those years of doing physical clown mask theatre, where you have to tell your story visually, has now meant that now we've come to do text work, we've sort of got that grounding. I feel like I feel like that's really helped us, so we're not kind of doing it from a standing start, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, even with our first show, Storm in a Teacup, at the end, the first version we did of that was not intentionally in any way accessible. We were brand new, we were playing with our first show, and then we realized it could be accessible, so we decided to integrate BSL and have an extra character that we brought on stage that basically was playing the telephone. And so anyone who phoned in, the BSL actress would then perform in BSL what was being said on the phone calls. So we kind of did a massive leap with that one because that's quite an art. Integrating BSL is quite an art. And I think we did actually really well for our first show. And, we got feedback from the deaf community. We did a performance at Soho as sort of like a sharing and got some feedback from the deaf audiences, and they told us what we were doing right, what we were doing wrong, and we worked on it. And we then went back to a bit more of a basic integration of access, I suppose. And then now we're branching out and trying captions and creative projections and all sorts of lovely things like that. So
which I think
I know that what I find really exciting is that now we've moved into film, you know, it's a medium that we've not worked in before, but because of all the work that we've been doing in theatre and the experimenting we've been doing there, now we've moved into film, we're actually able to push the boundaries of filmmaking, you know, in a whole new genre to us that we didn't realise that we're unfamiliar with, but we can push access in a whole new medium, which is really exciting.
Yeah, I think it is, and you've hit on it a couple of times there. There's a real art form to integrating and not making it obvious that you're making it necessarily that you're addressing these access needs of audience members, that you're trying to make it just part of the show, which sounds really simple, but I think I'm sure you found it, and certainly jumping between what you can do in theatre and what you can do on film, I'm sure it's kind of in some ways clashing in some places, but in other ways you go, that works really well, and kind of bringing bits of what you use in each one into your work that you're creating now.
Yeah, and it is what you say. It's about making it almost hidden in a way. It's about making it so integrated that it's you don't notice it's there, you know. I think if you approach both film and theatre from that same viewpoint, then that informs how you do it, I think.
I also think the quality makes a difference to the audiences in their trust in accessible work, because a lot of people have this warped view that, I mean, we've experienced it quite a lot, where people assume that accessible work is going to be low quality, or for children. We've had quite a few problems with people assuming because our work is accessible that it's for children. And I mean, once we came out to an audience full of, like, the whole theatre, 330 seats of children from schools, and our show was about divorce, and it had some very questionable things that probably 9-year-olds shouldn't be watching. I mean, nothing was that vulgar, nothing was that bad, but it probably wasn't the sort of thing teachers wanted to be bringing their kids to. And that's where people have seen, that's accessible, it'll be suitable for kids. Or, you know, it's clown. Yeah, I know we're clown, but I mean, there's a darkness to clown sometimes. It's best to be careful. But I think it's this connection with the worthy work, as they call it, and making assumptions. And actually, I have to say, accessible theatre to me, the accessible theatre that I've been to see, is often of a much higher quality and much more. I get almost a little bit, if I'm not seeing a show that's got access in it, I'm missing it now, because I mean, deaf actors, I have to say, some of the best actors I know and have seen on stage are deaf actors. They are outstanding. Their ability to communicate with an audience, because especially if their first language is BSL, their ability to communicate with an audience is just mind-blowing.
Yeah, that physicality that you have. You don't tend to find deaf actors who act from the neck up that you can do, you know, otherwise. The just sort of connection between their body and mind and communication is really strong.
And I do have to say, I think another advantage that Claire and I have is that, I mean, Claire is deaf, and I'm neurodiverse, so I have dyspraxia, so I have a slight sensitivity to sound. And I think to a degree that has helped us, because we have a personal understanding of how to make the work inclusive from a personal access point of view.
We have great arguments when we go on tour and we do the get-in, and I'm on stage going, can you turn that I can't hear that sound cue, and it's my cue to do something rather. You're going to have to whack up the volume. And Joe's standing in the audience going, you can't make it any louder, Claire. It's so loud in the audience. People will walk out.
Or I'm on stage going, I'm going to be sick, you need to turn that down, because it's vibrating through my head.
You turn the bass down, for the love of God.
Yeah, so if I can't handle it. So but we kind of ended up being a bit of a a perfect balance in that regard to help make our work. We did a run in Edinburgh once, and we had a mother come with her sons who had autism, and she was in a real state at the end of the show, not because the material was sad. It was, but in a joyous way, because her children had just sat and watched the whole thing completely mesmerized and still. And she said, I've never experienced that. They've never been able to sit still for a whole hour and just absorb into something. And it's because we've taken that kind of thing into consideration to make the safe, comfortable space for our audiences. And it's not going to work for absolutely everyone. I mean, it's hard to do it for absolutely everyone, but it's lovely when it does work and people come and tell you that meant a lot to me. So, yeah,
which is great. And you touched on the kind of the basis that a lot of accessible theatre is very, very slick and very well done, but that's because it is so well rehearsed to make sure that it really does to be as smooth as they can, because there's nothing, I imagine, even more frustratingly is if something says it's accessible and then it turns out that it's not, or it doesn't work.
That's like the ultimate sin. That's just like, it's the worst. And it happens a lot at festivals, where shows say that they're accessible because they've got a little bit of BSL in, or because there aren't any words or whatever, but it's not, because they've been made to be accessible. So a deaf audience member will go and see it and be like, this is not, I've just wasted my money on this ticket. This is not an accessible show. It's just awful when people do that. It's out of ignorance, I think.
It is, and it's also people just wanting to be able to tick the box. So they might get, a BSL interpreter for one show, let's say, which is brilliant, but they won't actually give the interpreter time to, rehearsal time to actually to have really be integrated into the show, or to learn the show really well, and that can sometimes happen. And the interpreters are doing an amazing job, but they're not given the time to give it what they're capable of giving it. And what I find frustrating with that is there are access pots of money out there to make sure that it can be done. Arts Council offer, you can apply for access costs to integrate deaf actors into your show. So you can hire a deaf or disabled actor to be in your show, and you can cover the costs of interpreters through the funding, and it doesn't take it out of your pot of funding. It's a separate pot that's offered by the funding bodies, and then you can integrate BSL well and from the beginning. Then I think that's a lot of things that people don't know. They don't know that they can get this funding to do it, so they don't think about it in the first place, or they don't even consider a character could be deaf or disabled. They don't even think about it. They think they write the script and that is how it is. And or if this is one sin that we saw in Edinburgh this last time, where there was a deaf character in the show, but they cast a hearing actor and gave her a fake hearing aid.
Oh yes.
Oh, and everybody thought the actress was deaf, so there was this huge community of the deaf audience members going to support this show with this brilliant story and this deaf actress. And the moment that they found out that the actress wasn't actually deaf, everyone's heart broke, because a deaf actor would have done that role.
And lovely show, actually.
It was sad, wasn't it? And
disappointing.
It's disappointing.
Yeah, I think it's it's a difficult kind of balance to strike, and I think it's something that if you work on it being accessible from day one, then it's much easier to keep it and interpret it, rather than considering it as a bolt-on to shows and kind of, oh well, we're here now and we'll just kind of try and make it work. Whereas if from the start it's there,
and then you avoid that thing of, oh, we've got this great show and then we're going to do one or two captioned shows and we're going to do one interpreted show, It's like, well, why not just make our thing was that you could, deaf people particularly, they have this all the time. Oh, we're showing all the top cinema films, and on a Wednesday at 11:30 you can watch it subtitled, just the once throughout the whole run. Well, that's not good enough. A, people work, and B, what if you can't make it that one day? So our thing was always to make all of the show, the whole run, accessible. Just the show is just accessible, so anyone can come and see it whenever they want to. Why wouldn't you do that if you could?
Yeah. I'm just excited to see, because things are changing and people are making more of an effort and doing and thinking outside the box and being creative with it. And it's really exciting because we're seeing a whole new world of work and mindsets. And that was one thing we were worried about during lockdown, was that people had been considering access, and access was starting to get more, more time at the table, I suppose you could call it, or more seats at the table. And that was really exciting. And then lockdown happened, and suddenly a whole group of artists became it felt like we were going to go backwards, like things were going to go backwards because access was going to be forgotten about because it wasn't at the forefront at the moment. The most important thing was that lockdown and theatres were closing. And, so lots of movements came out of that, so that didn't happen. But one thing that a lot of people did forget to do was to caption their videos when they put them out. And there's lots of apps out there you can use that just add them on for you, and then you just check whether the dictation is correct, and and then you've made your work accessible. It's really, really easy. And that was something that we really, and we created a list with two other companies, Deaf and Hearing Ensemble and Handprint Theatre, who make children's accessible work. And we created a master list on Facebook to be able to list all the accessible work that was being posted or streamed, or and we were checking whether it was accessible, which was a bit of work for us, but it was great. And the three companies came together to be able to direct deaf audiences towards what is being made out there that's accessible as well. So.
Yeah, which is great. And when you think about it, if people go through the effort to make one show accessible, surely it's not that much different. It shouldn't be that any different to make that available at all performances, which sounds like absolute common sense. But for now, part of it a little bit intrigues me as well, and it comes from my work at the Edinburgh Fringe and kind of providing venues for people, is do you guys find challenges or difficult to find places that you can take your work? Like there are certain barriers that you find that at times make it a little bit more difficult than it should be?
We have had some barriers in the past where we booked a space that we thought would be, for example, at Edinburgh Fringe. I won't say exactly which one. I don't think the venue is anymore anyway. But we booked a venue at Edinburgh for our first ever Edinburgh. And when we arrived, and we'd said we were an accessible show, we had registered with Ewan's Guide so that they could come and see the show. And when we got there, we found that the actual space they'd put us in was not wheelchair accessible. It just had a wheelchair, like a wheelchair accessible toilet, but they couldn't actually get into our theatre. And we were like, I'm sorry, what? And, a little bit of a negative sort of slight discrimination. And again, I'm not going to mention who they are, but some discrimination towards us at the beginning. But I think things, as we've grown as a company, and we've grown in confidence in our work. And we've also grown in confidence in our disabilities, in the fact that, we're much more open and vocal about it. I found I needed to hide the fact that I was dyspraxic for a long time because I didn't want people to think I wasn't capable or that I might be difficult to work with because I'm different. And it's, now I'm like, no, I'm dyspraxic. This means this, it's an exciting, it's a quality. And so I find fewer barriers because I'm more confident about who I am. And I'm sure Claire feels the same because we've opened up in the community as well.
Yeah, and I think it's really difficult because we try not to sort of focus on the barriers and try and be positive, and because theatre is such a tricky industry to navigate anyway. But I suppose one of the barriers that we've faced, we've touched on earlier, is when you're trying to build a tour, it can be quite tricky, because they either go, oh, well, you're an accessible show, so you must be children's, so we'll put you in the children part of programming. Or they go, oh, well, we've got our one accessible show this season, so we don't need another one, kind of thing. So that can be quite a challenge in the booking, in the putting together of a tour. I think they're the biggest things we've come across. We
had a little, I mean, they addressed it, and hopefully changes will happening. We did have a little problem with Edinburgh in the fact that the last time we were up, they wouldn't list us as an accessible show because we didn't have BSL or captions in it, because our show is innately accessible for different reasons. They didn't understand how or why, or what we do to make our work accessible, so they weren't able to list us. But we addressed it at the time, and we've had conversations with them, so hopefully that's something that's changing now.
I think that you've touched on there, Joe, that the problem with accessibility is the whole tick box thing, and they fell into that trap of, can a show tick the box that says it's got BSL or captions? And that's where you get the flip side as well. Oh, we can tick that there's BSL in this show, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's accessible. Mm-hmm. Or we couldn't tick that there was BSL in the show or captions because we didn't need it in our show because the show was inherently accessible. So you get into this, and that felt quite hard, actually, being a company of 8 years strong, who have, like, our whole raison d'etre is to make accessible work, to then not be allowed to be advertised as accessible was quite a difficult one to take, I'm not going to lie.
No, I think the Fringe very much are, or certainly the festival as a whole, are kind of accessibility is that. I think the bigger challenge in Edinburgh is Edinburgh itself being, for someone with physical access needs, being not the best city. I mean, I live in the city and it's not fun to get around at the best of times. So it's, I think that, and it is great. And I think you've hit on the head there that most companies now are very much willing to listen and willing to kind of adapt what they're doing to fit in as many different things as possible, and make sure they're doing offerings for as many different to make as many shows as accessible as possible, and find ways to make it work in their particular setting. I think the conversation has certainly opened up over the last few years. Definitely, people are more willing to ask the questions, more willing to go and seek the advice from people who are already doing it, which is great, really great. Well, we'll wrap this into the final little bit, and kind of the bit that everyone on the podcast gets asked these same 3 questions that might seem completely random, and some people find a little bit more difficult to answer than others, but that's absolutely fine. So the first one that we've got is, if you had a dream show that you could work on, that you could produce, or where you would really want to, you see, like, that's for the dream, where or what is that for you?
Go on, Joe.
So my love of theatre came through my first introduction to musical theatre. I don't work in musical theatre, but I love it. And a few years ago, no, it was last year, I think, I went to go and see Les Mis again, but BSL interpreted, with an interpreter on the side who was about 5 meters away from the stage, going to point out. And I just wanted to go and see how they were going to do it. And since then, I have had this, I can't even describe what it is, this need, or real yearning, that's the word, thank you, darling. This yearning to recreate Les Mis BSL integrated, because I know loads of BSL fluent actors who have magnificent voices, who are magnificent musical theatre trained actors. I know some deaf actors who've gone deaf later on in life who have stunning voices and sign. And I can just see how you could make a BSL integrated where all the characters are signing and singing, and it would just be, it would be gorgeous. So that is my dream, is that I could make a BSL integrated, or work with Limis to create like a, I don't know, short run, like a few days of a BSL integrated version of Limis. That's me.
Wow. Okay.
No, big challenge.
Yeah, I can't see Hot Coals moving into musicals anytime soon, but well, world domination, it's possible. We could do everything. I might have to give you more than one, I'm afraid.
Absolutely fine.
I suppose I'm really excited by our Earshot project. I really want to get that off the ground, because I think that's going to be such an amazing project for us, and as performers as well, it really plays to our strengths. So I'm really excited to get that off the ground. I'm really keen to get in the studio and get stuck into that one.
Yeah, it's going to be a great show. Really excited.
Also, our Talking Bodies project.
That's right.
It's the dogs. They're off. They sent your delivery. Go get your delivery. Our Talking Bodies project is going to be, it's like our most ambitious project yet, and it basically consists of, it's going to be 6 short films, a collection of 6 short films written and directed by deaf and disabled artists, and then we want to put it on in an interactive, immersive installation that the audience will promenade round the installation. So as you walk into one section, it'll be the set of that film, and the film will be projected on the back wall, and then you move into the next one. So it's quite a massive project, and I'm keen to see that get off the ground as well. I think there are Hot Coals ones, and on a private one, I'd really love to direct a heist movie. They're my favourite. It's just my absolute favourite genre. I love a heist. Yeah, love it.
Sounds great. Absolutely sounds great. Love those, and love the kind of variety and things of it as well. Our second one is probably the most random question, but stems from a conversation on a stage I had on tour back in February, and it's just something that's intrigued myself and a few others. Everyone seems to have a go-to after show snack, something that they just go, that's what I need, that's what I'm going to have. And it's something that quite interesting and has intrigued us. So what is that one thing after a show that you just always find yourself going or craving or wanting?
Go, Joe.
I mean, I always need a cup of tea the moment a show's done. I know a lot of people need booze or something. I'm like, I just need a cup of tea. And quite often the thing I have with me when we're on tour is a box of French fancies. So it's probably a French fancy and a cup of tea. It's totally British of me, isn't it?
It's totally grandma.
Oh.
No, it's a funny question, because I think that food and drink is quite fundamental to Hot Coals. Like, we do quite a lot of planning around where we're going to have what restaurant we'll have a meeting in, or when we're going to have our cups of tea breaks and stuff like that.
We often have food in the shows, don't forget.
We often have food in the shows. We almost always have tea in the show at some point, although I'm not recommending you would drink it necessarily. So I had a little look at that question last night, and I was like, I've got quite a lot of answers to this. I have a get-in go-to, which is also a very important one. And
mine works for both. So.
Okay. No, mine are all different. My early morning get-in is a sausage sandwich or a sausage bat of some description. Lots of butter and a bit of ketchup. That's my get-in. And then after a show, I really crave red meat and a glass of wine. I don't know if it's that I'm burning off protein or what, but I really crave red meat. And we, Joe, got into a bit of a habit on tour of finding ourselves in a van in the middle of the night on the side of McDonald's.
I never eat junk food. I'm not really a big junk food eater. You have just highlighted, actually, often before we go on show, I have a tuna sandwich. I've just, like, before that was a thing. And I don't eat much meat or fish, but I had a tuna sandwich for every time we performed at RADA, part of the festival. I've always had a tuna sandwich.
I didn't notice that. I can't believe I didn't notice tuna sandwiches in the dressing room.
I know. No, I did, definitely. So yeah, tuna sandwich before, a cup of tea and French fancy after.
And a McDonald's in a lay-by.
Yeah, I mean, that's a touring thing, but
that's absolutely a touring thing. We'll absolutely back that one up when you're traveling between venues. We'll absolutely back up the service station choice.
Yeah.
Amazing. Love that. And so our final question is, what's the one thing that you know now that you wish you'd known when you were first starting out, that would have made your life an awful lot easier, that you wish someone had told you when you were first starting out?
That's so hard.
Or that one piece of advice that you could give to someone starting out now that you would go.
I think that's easier, because I'm a great believer, me personally, that I wouldn't want to tell my younger self anything, because I feel like everything that's happened to me, it sounds cheesy, but it's the truth. Everything that's happened to me, both negative and positive, is the reason I am. It's all part of the story. Do you know what I mean? It's the reason I am where I am now, and I wouldn't change anything. But the one thing I would probably tell others, and I've been tempted to at times, not wanting to butt in, but is to not stress about things. Is to think outside the box and think about what other things you're good at. So I accidentally found out that I was a good illustrator through Hot Coals, because I was trying to explain to Claire and Margot, who was one of the company at the very beginning and did the first show with us. I was trying to explain to them about how I saw the characters. So I drew it for them, and then I discovered I was an illustrator, and then through the illustrations, I've now become a set designer, and a freelance set designer. I go to other companies and I design work for them. And so yeah, thinking about what other creative things you can do, and so that you can sort of expand your palette, so to speak. But it's to not stress about things like the amount of effort and time I put into getting an agent. I mean, I had an agent I did acting when I was a kid. I had an agent when I was a kid, and I got lots of work through them. But when you're a kid, it's different. And when I left drama school, I remember being heartbroken and really stressed by the fact that I couldn't get an agent, even though the whole purpose of me going to drama school was to start up a theatre company and to make my own work. But I felt like I wasn't fitting the mold of what it means to be an actor in Britain. I wasn't getting those things that everyone says you need to have, like an agent. I now have an agent, but I have an agent in my own sort of, our own agreement, because, I've got that through the fact that I've been doing work from Hot Coals. So all of the work pretty much I've got has been through. It's been through Hot Coals.
About that earlier, weren't we? We were talking about how, like, when you come out of drama school, you spend most of your early career essentially trying to entertain agents and casting directors. That seems to be your primary reason for being. And I have to say, my career absolutely changed at the point that I decided to stop doing that. At the point to go, fuck 'em, I'm just going to make my own work and do what I want. My career completely opened up at that point. I have to say.
Yeah.
What would mine be? It's a really hard one, because I think mine would be that my advice would be that there's no substitute for time. I think I always, and I still do it now, I've always tried to do things quickly because I'm a real goal-driven person. So I'm always like, how am I going to get to that goal? How am I going to get there? What's the quickest route to get to that goal? And I'm always striving to do that. But actually, there is no substitute for time and experience, and things just take the length that they take.
Yeah, and another thing, so I'm just jumping in. When opportunities arise to have conversations with people, to talk to people, grab them, talk to people. I mean, I've offered myself, I've offered to talk to people about when they're going through a rough time with their career and stuff. I've said, you want to have a conversation about what it is you're doing and where you're going, and some people have taken it and other people, haven't responded. And I've gone, I would have I've always been a very big believer in grabbing every opportunity, and there's one thing that we're embarking on at the moment with Hot Coals is we're embarking on a collaboration with DH Ensemble, where we're creating another company which is called Strive, and the ambitions of that company are, we don't know what they are yet, but we're embarking on our first project together, and we will stay 2 individual companies, but we'll have this other company where we're working together as well. And that all came out of a conversation just because that person offered to have a conversation with me, and we talked about what we were doing as a company, and where it is we wanted to end up being. And the idea came out of that, and that person shared their time and their knowledge to help me find those things. And I think that if anyone is offering their time to talk to you, talk to them, because you might discover some really exciting things.
Yeah, I think that's some really great advice and great points as well for going forward. I've really enjoyed talking to you guys and talking everything you guys have to offer, and it sounds like you've got some really exciting things on the horizon.
Yeah, lots. Yeah, too much sometimes.
Absolutely. So we'll fire out all the links, and everything will be in descriptions for the podcast and stuff, so that'll all be great. But it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for listening to the Stage Is Yours podcast. Want to know more? Then head over to all of our socials. You can find us at Stage Is Yours Pod, where you can catch a cheeky glimpse at some of our upcoming guests, and subscribe to our YouTube channel to make sure that you never miss an episode. This has been the Stage Is Yours podcast, talking all things theatre and events. Until next time.